Welcome to another CEO Wisdom Pod with Sarah Josephine Hjorth. She is a co-founder and CEO at Canopy Lab, an Obama Leader Europe 2022, and a professional board member. We're going to talk about edtech funding, learning, e-learning, women, and women entrepreneurs and women leaders, that is, and everything in between. This pod is brought to you by podfire.com. That's my podcasting company. If you want to start your own, scale your podcast, monetize it the unconventional way, go to podfire.com. Sarah, welcome to the pods. Tell me a bit more about yourself and Canopy Lab.
Hey, it's so good to be here. Well, Canopy Lab is an ed tech. We started out a little confused. Were we doing content or were we doing software? And then we fell in love with software. And then today we use generative AI to automate the course creation process. So something that was very analog and took a really long time back in the day, we've automated it and made it easier and much more fun. And then we work with over 200 NGOs all over the world and help take that amazing content on really, really important topics that they have that was previously super unsexy and not very accessible, and make it fun and engaging.
So what's your story and how did you get in entrepreneurship?
So I never really wanted to be an entrepreneur. I had a totally different career in mind for myself. I wanted to be a diplomat. I was always really fascinated with influencing how the world moves and the big problems that are out there. And then throughout my career, I realized that there are some people that build stuff and there are people who talk about stuff. And that I thought I was in the talking category. But I was always so envious of people who made stuff that didn't exist before they created it. And then as it became more accessible that anyone can really go into the field of software, I realized creation, it's not just art, it's not just physical objects, but creating software that shapes how we move and how we live and how we connect with other people. That to me was the absolute most amazing thing you could do. And so I kind of fell into it a little bit. Co-founded Canopy Lab with my husband, who was already a software developer. So I had a little help on the side with someone who'd been doing that for a long time. And then I also started as a PhD student, sort of exploring and researching the intersection of emerging social media and how people use that. And then eventually landed in the space between learning and artificial intelligence and saw that as like a super high impact area. Again, because it's not sexy. So not a lot of investments had gone into that space. So it was super underfunded software. It didn't look nice. It was not user friendly. It didn't live up to the standards that a lot of people have for their typical software. So it was really just like there was a pretty big niche, but there was a lot of space for innovation in it.
I want to talk about the speaking vs building stuff, like I often reflect on that. I work with some coaches as my clients, and becoming a coach is so easy nowadays. And we understand why would someone become a coach, right? It's like, oh, I want to improve, so now I can practice on other folks, become better and make money at the same time, sort of ikigai. The same for speaking, I feel. Well, it's practicing your oral skills and just getting better at speaking in front of large crowds, public speaking and so forth. So sort of ikigai again. The downside to that is that sometimes a lot of people fall into the trap of just talking, like moving their lips and just not acting too much, not building. And that's a very pervasive trap, because not only do you get skewed in your own learning because you need to build to learn, but you spread false information pretty much all the time. So sometimes I get sort of turned off by some speakers on the podcast. They talk, they use these buzzwords, but in the end, there's very few substance. What do you have to say about that?
I felt the same way about entrepreneurship before I started. I felt like it was a lot of young dudes walking around who wanted to build the next unicorn. And then they just build startups in areas of opportunity where they thought there was the potentially highest growth and the highest exit. I think a lot of the best entrepreneurs are built in spaces where they understand the problem in that niche. So for example, like I've always been an educator. So for me to venture into software in the space of education, it makes sense because I get the problem. I know what the teacher's issue is and how to solve it, right? So a lot of times, like at the office, when I work with the engineers, I have to say, the reality test, like, would a teacher do this in real life? is this an actual problem that we're solving? So I think that, you know, what you're saying is something that could be applied to a lot of industries, whether you're training someone to speak. Speaking is not the art of speaking. Speaking is the art of having something that you want to say and that you want to help people change their behavior in some way, right? Same with building software. It's amazing, it's accessible to a lot more people, but we need to match the right space with the right people so they can solve actual problems that are persistent in the world.
Yeah, the unicorn and startup bro thing, 100%. I feel though that product market fit is super complex, especially if you're contrarian like me and you don't want to go the funding route, which I believe to be some kind of bubble. That's very contrarian, but more on that later. If you're going for bootstrap product market fit, you need to go where there's already some need, right? In something that you're good at and something that you can get paid, right? So, sort of the ikigai model. My case, for example, could be AI outreach, and from there get other ideas, and from there maybe have even some social angles to the whole thing. I believe in creating ecosystems as well and having one startup that generates quite a lot of money and re-injecting all that cash into the ecosystem. What do you think about that?
No, I mean, I think you're right. So we were bootstrapped for quite some time, and then we ended up taking VC investment. And there's a lot of trade-offs with that, right? Because we also work with the nonprofit sector. So a lot of times, like, they prioritize faster growth more than sustainable growth, or like investing in those relationships and building sustainable businesses that last, you know, for over a decade. So there's just a kind of inherent conflict in how you scale those businesses out. And I also believe in that you can have a main business and then do these branch outs. So for us, like, software is the main thing. But when we started, people always said, like, you're either software or you're content, for example. It was as if those two things didn't exist, but they're dependent on each other. So for us, it's always made sense to even have consultancy on the side or content creation on the side. And then that fuels the business and it gives us some autonomy over controlling our own fate. And last year was the first year we were cash flow positive. And that's like a totally different way of operating a business again. And I have to say, like, for me as the CEO and co-founder, it's given me back control of my business because I'm not so dependent on the VC throwing cash at me, encouraging me to burn it rather fast, and then me needing them again, and then losing more and more of my business. So it's been quite interesting, sort of, you know, with the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a lot of money coming into edtech for the.
You're muted.
That, you know, survive.
Okay. Yeah, continue. Sorry, the sound switch. It's good now.
Oh, it's fine. Yeah. No, so some companies can only survive if they're VC fueled, but now that the climate shifts, we'll really see what companies are there to stay in the long run.
Right. I mean, VC money is always interesting. I'd take like a VC, but someone that's really eccentric, like myself, and has no string attached. You know, it's either like you're moonshotting and you're succeeding or not. So that I wouldn't feel some kind of pressure that would give me a bunch of tips as well. That would be more than a silent investor. The second thing, yeah, I wouldn't want them to throw me out of my own company, like some VCs have a reputation from doing. So I would want to make sure that this is clear between us before we sign the papers. Now, Canopy Lab, you folks are in various regions of the world. Why exactly, and what is it that you do precisely? It seems to me that you do part consulting, part of it is a SaaS, the Canopy and Student Lab. So tell me a bit more about the business model here, how you get your clients, how you make money with that.
So you're right. We primarily are a software as a service company. So we sell our AI-based learning platform directly via our website, and then as an enterprise sales model. On average, we charge $1 per user per month, but with clients that have between 2,000 to 10,000 employees or people that they train per client, you pretty quickly hit really high numbers. That's the primary thing we do. Then we view ourselves a little bit like a Robin Hood type of model, where we then give it away for free to NGOs all over the world to help them train people primarily in the global south. And we do that for free. And then you're right, we started based in Scandinavia. which makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of values and the way we think about education in the Nordics that's built into the software. But then really quickly, we saw an uptake of usage in Latin America. And then we decided that we needed to be there to really understand that market. It's a super high potential market. It's also incredibly volatile. For example, if you look at it just from like a SaaS website, it's fine. It's pretty stable. There can be a higher churn than in other regions. But if you look at it from an enterprise sales perspective, it's quite tricky. Governments like come and go. So I think we've been in Peru for like 4 years and there's been like 5 presidents. So you can come really far with signing an agreement with the government, and then all of a sudden the day after, like there's another minister of education. We've seen that happen for quite a few times. So you have to have a certain stomach and a certain temper to like that. But I've always liked to operate on the markets that are a little trickier. It's a lot more exciting, but also the impact that you have. You know, building out a learning solution for a sales company in the Nordics is not very exciting. But coming out, for example, we're launching a new project in Cambodia, really helping people learn in a place like that, that's way more exciting, way more challenging too, right? So how do you deploy a large language model in a country where the language isn't really working with a large language model, for example? To me, like there has to be this challenge, you know, people don't become co-founders and CEOs of like tech companies because they want it to be a stable, smooth ride. Like we're always sort of pushing for the next frontier and pushing for the next problem to solve. So for us, a lot of that is like, how do we level the playing field in the global south? And how do we try to put some of our models out now in languages that are extremely tricky to work with?
And how did you get the Obama Leader Europe award in 2022?
So the Obama Foundation works with about 30 leaders from Europe every year. And back then you got nominated. So there's a couple of people that can nominate. It's typically former prime ministers of the sorts. They can nominate future leaders that they think are relevant for the organization. And then you apply and go through an interview round. And rumor has it that it's actually Obama himself that reads the final applications. And then he puts together a group. And then there's a mentorship program that lasts for about 6 months where you meet the other leaders. And then it culminates in a big gathering where Obama joins himself, where you work with adaptive leadership, with what your values are and how they're tested, and then come together and discuss, you know, some of the big topics we discuss now, like ethics in AI and what is the future going to look like, or more regulation or less regulation. And then we're really different. A couple of us are from the private sector.
Some people work in civil service. So that way we don't think the same thing. And that's kind of what makes it interesting.
There you go. Singularity University, you started that in 2018. What did you learn from that? It's one of my favorite places to get educated.
So I'm teaching there. I don't attend the programs, but I teach at the programs and have been doing that for quite a few years. I was super lucky. In some ways, it was really random, but I think that when you are really open to the people that are in the room and talkative and outgoing, you tend to meet, you know, all these creative, incredible people. I was really lucky to be introduced to some people from Singularity University when they opened an office in Denmark, and there were some of the early investors in my company, the 2 people that opened the branch in the Nordics. And then when they expanded their faculty, so originally, like the original crew at Singularity are mostly people who like invented a technology. And then after a while, they thought, what about some of the people who would like interpret it or interpret like whole areas of how the technology is applied? And they thought maybe it'd be interesting to have someone who talks about, you know, all of these technologies in the field of education and food and democracy. And they reached out and said if I was interested in being sort of this future of education, focusing mostly on AI. And I said, I would love it. And then I've been teaching there ever since. Recently got back from teaching the EP program in Silicon Valley and headed to Dubai to teach at a program very soon as well. And it's great because you're in the room with the people who make the decisions from the biggest companies in the world. And they're there and they took time, they put away their phone and they just want to receive like what's happening with the metaverse, what's happening with generative AI, what's happening with synthetic content creation. And then they come with their perspectives and work with all the content they get, and then go home and hopefully launch these moonshot projects. And I have to say, like, even though I'm there to teach, I learned so much from the people in the program that every time I come back, I have a new connection, someone I want to work with on a project, or someone who helps me with something, or I change the technology that I'm working with in some way. Like recently, I haven't really been super into the metaverse for a while. Not because everyone's saying it's dead, because that's not true. But I've just kind of been taking a break. And after I came back in November, I thought, I gotta try some more stuff. And I've been really into like reinvestigating a lot of the games and the spaces again.
You also touch interesting areas, including sexual reproductive health, some areas that are neglected in these countries. Tell us more about your decision to educate folks in communities that don't often have this education.
So I always think that, like, I am so lucky, right? I was born in Denmark. I'm half Iranian, and I could have just as well been born in Iran. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with Iran, but as a woman, I do much prefer having been born in Denmark. I have had the right to go to school for free. I live in one, of the countries that holds the most powerful passport in the world. And that comes with like some, obligation to give something back. And then also I thought, when you're passionate about education, of course, some people like science and some like social science. For me, it's also about like what touches all of us, and that's our sexual identity, right? And I'm from Denmark, and we're incorporated in Denmark, and we can provide information about sexual and reproductive rights to anybody because it's not political here. Here, it's like a basic human right to understand yourself, your body, your sexual, your gender identity. But in a lot of the spaces we operate, it's very controversial. So we think that kind of like as a back door, we bring in some of this content and it's totally free. And then we bring it in as an alternative in the schooling systems where they may not be given access to that. I mean, even today, talking about sex is controversial in the United States of America, So being Danish, it puts us in this unique position to claim a content area that's huge. I mean, I think the biggest learning platform in the world is going to be about sex one day, right? Our focus isn't just like sex. It's like all of the things around it and, periods and prevention and stuff. But I'm not going to rule out that we're going to go that way as well, because it's about providing constructive spaces where people get to know the truth. I think that's a lot about like what my work is about. For me, like, I love to partner with people about content about space or even about COVID or about sex, but it has to be sort of evidence, truth-based, empowering people to find information and making up their own mind. Like, I don't want to tell them what to think, but I want to give you the tools to decide for yourself.
Right. What are your top goals for this year? You seem to have much going on. What would be your 3 top areas of focus?
My number one focus is updating some of our generative AI models. This stuff gets outdated super, super, super fast, and you can be, ahead last year and then behind this year. My second priority is implementing a sustainable business model for our NGOs. So far, we've just given the content for them for free, but I see there can be a good model where they're actually making money off of the content, and that we're paying them to produce more content. And then as the third thing, I want to learn more from different industries that I never thought were related to our industry. To give an example, like in the past, I've learned a lot from the arts, going to the cinema or going to see the ballet and see how they staged the whole thing has given me a lot of feedback for design people. Now, I had this like major hip and leg surgery recently, and it's made me very interested in human augmentation and generally thinking about whether our body serves our purposes. And I think there can be an intersection about human augmentation and learning in the future. So sometimes like taking those spaces that seem to not be related at first, but then finding out that there could be something to benefit from learning about it, that's the third goal.
Love it. And where can people find out more information about you, Sarah?
So you can go on to canopylab.io to read more about what we're doing. And then my name is Sarah Josephine I'm mostly on Instagram and then on LinkedIn. And I'm quite active in those 2 places.